attendees are trickling in. All right, you could probably start now.
Okay, good morning. My name is Justin Jackson. I am the Director of Compliance for the Community Development Administration. I'm here today with Community Development Supervisor Tayo Afuwape, and we thank you again for taking your time to join us as we prepare for the upcoming round of Community Development Block Grant or CDBG funding. So our schedule for this year is full as we are in development of the 2022 Annual Action Plan. And as we look to ensure that the mission of the Community Development Administration, or CDA, continues. The Community Development Administration, CDA, has a mission to promote neighborhood growth and stabilization through community development and the production of new and rehabilitated housing, especially for low and moderate income persons. Through transparent, competitive funding cycles, CDA solicits quality proposals for housing and community development activities through the non-housing RFP. To assist applicants, CDA periodically holds training sessions to assist in the development of proposals. So our schedule over the next few days, weeks, and months has been designed to meet our federal timelines and requirements. In meeting those timelines and requirements, we here at CDA aid the growth and stabilization not only of our neighborhoods, but our city as a whole. So today is day 2 of our CDBG workshop training. Yesterday, we had a training session for eGrams, which is an electronic grants and inventory management system that is used for applicants who are looking to apply for CDBG funding. We also had a walkthrough, a CDBG RFP workshop walkthrough, where we highlighted some specifics of the RFP that has been made available today. So the RFP is active and available on the City of St. Louis CDA website. We will remind you all throughout today's presentation that the RFP is active and currently available. So today's session, again, this is day 2 of 4. Today's session will revolve around organizational requirements. So we will highlight some things regarding organizational requirements that we think are helpful for those who are interested in applying for CDBG funding for the 2022 period. All training and materials for today and future trainings materials can be found on the CDA website, and we encourage you to periodically check the CDA website for news and updates. So at this point in time, I will turn the presentation over to CDA Community Development Supervisor Tayo Afuwape, who will start our organizational requirement presentation.
All right, thank you, Justin. Let me share my screen. And can everyone see me scrolling through the slides? Okay, I take no news as good news. So welcome to the CDBG Organizational Requirements Workshop. There are 3 goals of this workshop. Firstly, to review requirements necessary to operate a CDBG funded program. Secondly, to determine if your organization meets general requirements to apply for and be awarded CDBG funding. And thirdly, to provide an overview of programmatic requirements. There will be a financial management virtual workshop tomorrow on July 28th at 1 p.m. We will first cover general requirements related to nonprofit entities and them demonstrating sufficient infrastructure to undertake the proposed CDBG activity. Secondly, we will cover registrations and clearances as it relates to agencies acquiring an EIN and DUNS number, enrolling into federal government's SAM.GOV system, documenting no hiring of unauthorized aliens by using E-Verify, and acquiring an active business license or exemption and being current on taxes to obtain the City of St. Louis CBI clearance. Thirdly, we will review the required coverage and limits of various types of insurances and bonding. Fourthly, we will review key policies and procedures, notably conflict of interest as it relates to persons working under the CDBG activity, non-discrimination and grievance policy for clients participating in the CDBG activity, and affirmative action plans that ensure equal employment opportunities. Lastly, new this year, we will review construction requirements for agencies applying for public improvement or facility activities, site control, project schedule, construction budget, site photos, and an agency construction resume must be included in the application. Design documents and environmental assessments are optional, but will be required if the agency is CDBG funded. All CDBG funded activities must adhere to CDA procurement procedures when soliciting the contractor or general contractor. Adherence to other city and federal regulations, such as MBE, WBE, Section 3, and Davis-Bacon may also be required. Applicants must be a public or private nonprofit agency or organization to apply for funding. You must apply for funding via eGrants. As Justin mentioned before, eGrants is an electronic grant application management system that is web-based. And yesterday I provided a tutorial on how to use eGrants that can be accessed on the CDA website. When applying for funding in eGrants, the first 3 items you must upload are: number 1, a certificate of good standing. A certificate of good standing documents that an agency is legally registered in Missouri and abides by state requirements. It can be acquired from the Missouri Secretary of State website or by searching under www.sos.mo.gov. The certificate must be issued and date sealed on or after July 1st of 2021. Number 2, you must upload your 501c3 determination letter. This letter documents that an agency is a nonprofit entity exempt from federal income taxes. Number 3, you must upload your IRS 990. This document is the nonprofit's financial statements made available to the public. CDA needs either the most current IRS 990 or proof of an approved extension. If you are awarded CDBG funds, you will need to provide 4 additional documents prior to entering a contract with CDA. Firstly, you will need a state tax exempt letter. This letter documents that an agency is a nonprofit exempt from sales taxes. Secondly, you will need a state sealed certificate of incorporation along with a copy of the Articles of Incorporation. These documents establish that the entity exists under state law. Thirdly, you will need a copy of the Board of Directors bylaws. Bylaws are typically created at the inception of an entity and are amended as needed. They lay out how an organization will perform essential functions, such as how to run meetings and how to select, appoint, and remove board members. Fourthly, you will need a completed board list with current Board of Directors job titles, employers, mailing addresses, businesses owned, and race and ethnicity information. This form will be provided by CDA for agencies to complete prior to entering a contract. Organizations, including their bylaws, board members, staff, and/or potential partners, must demonstrate capacity to undertake proposed activities. When applying for funding, you must provide resumes and job descriptions of staff involved in the administration, operation, and/or management of the proposed program. Resumes and job descriptions help raters of your proposal gauge the staff's level of experience in managing the proposed activity. Secondly, you must provide an organizational chart. An organizational chart is one way to demonstrate sufficient segregation of duties. If you have all programmatic staff and no one is responsible for handling the books, for example, your organization does not have sufficient organizational capacity. If you have not been previously funded by CDA, you will also need a letter of recommendation from a previous funder. CDBG funding is compliance heavy, requiring both CDA and the funded agency to jump through, which may sometimes seem like a circus full of hoops. CDA needs assurance that the agency has historically demonstrated being good stewards of funds, especially with funds with quote unquote many strings attached. Applicants must certify that no conflict of interest will arise through the use of federal funds. This will be discussed more in depth later on. Furthermore, funds may not be used to support inherently religious activities. However, an organization may still engage in religious activities as long as they are voluntary and separate from the CDBG funded activity. CDBG funds may not be used to support worship or religious instruction. And a faith-based organization cannot be discriminated against or given preferential treatment on the basis of religion when applying for CDBG funded services. Next, I will cover registrations and clearances. All organizations must have an employer identification number, EIN, which is also known as a federal tax ID number or a federal ID number. An EIN is a number assigned by the IRS to identify a business. Applying for an EIN is free and online. The website is indicated on the slide. Tax-exempt organizations must be formed legally prior to applying for an EIN. DUNS stands for Data Universal Numbering System. It is also known as a DUNS number. It is a unique numeric identifier associated with the agency during its life cycle, including during name changes and bankruptcies. The DUNS number is required of all businesses wanting to be under contract with the federal government. Applying for a DUNS number is free and online. The website is listed on this slide. The SAM in SAM.GOV stands for System Award Management. Agencies must register and be active with SAM.GOV to do business with the federal government. Note that their website has been recently revamped, so please make the necessary adjustments when maneuvering their new website. Businesses cannot be debarred from working with the federal government, nor have any active exclusions, including delinquent federal taxes. CDA strongly recommends that you start the registration process early. If funded, you will be required to comply with Section 2856.500 RSMO and provide proof of E-Verify registration. The statute requires enrollment and participation in a federal work authorization program with respect to the employees working in connection with the contracted services. The purpose of E-Verify is to demonstrate that the agency has not and will not knowingly hire an unauthorized alien. For more information about E-Verify, visit the website on this slide. All organizations must pass the City of St. Louis Central Business Index, or CBI Clearance. All applicants must have a current business license or be deemed exempt. Nonprofits are typically exempt. However, if you are a nonprofit, do not presume you are exempt. You still have to contact the City of St. Louis license collector to verify your exemption status at 314-622-4528. Again, that phone number is area code 314-622-4528. Applicants, furthermore, cannot have any delinquent federal, state, or local taxes. To obtain your tax status, contact the City of St. Louis Collector of Revenue at area code 314-622-4111. Again, that's 314-622-4111. If funded, CDA will require insurance and bonding coverage for the term of the contract to protect from loss due to theft, fraud, and/or undue physical damage related to the CDBG program. Note that insurance and bonding limits are subject to change. If they do change, you will be notified prior to being under contract with CDA. These next two slides detail what the coverage and limits have been historically for insurance and bonding. CDA requires proof of three types of insurance. Firstly, CDA needs proof of general liability insurance with a single incident limit of at least $1 million per occurrence. Secondly, CDA needs proof of vehicle liability insurance with a minimum amount of $500,000 combined single limit per occurrence for bodily injury and property damage. Your agency still needs this coverage even if the agency does not own their own vehicle, because it also covers employees who may drive their vehicles while conducting the CDBG activity. Thirdly, CDA needs proof of the agency's workers' compensation policy as required under state statute. For more information, go to the Missouri Department of Insurance. The website is on the slide. City of St. Louis, in care of CDA, must be listed as the additional insured to the address of 1520 Market Street, Suite 2000, St. Louis, Missouri 63103. Please do not use City Hall's address. You will need a commercial blanket bond, also known as honesty bonding or crime coverage, for a minimum of $25,000 per occurrence, covering all persons employed and/or authorized to perform any function related to the CDBG program. Persons covered include the executive director, board members with signatory authority, financial officers and staff, and CDBG staff. I will now pass the baton to Justin, who will discuss CDBG policies and procedures.
Thank you, Tayo.
Do you need me to still continue sharing the screen?
Why don't you close yours out? I'm going to share mine.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, good morning again. I will be going over the next series of slides, which will discuss required CDBG policies and procedures. So policies and procedures are an essential part of any organization. Together, policies and procedures provide a roadmap for day-to-day operations, and they ensure compliance with laws and regulations, give guidance for decision-making, and streamline internal processes. So organizations will need to provide a copy of their personnel policies and procedure manuals prior to entering into a contract with CDA. These policies are important because they address pertinent issues such as what constitutes acceptable behavior by employees. Procedures, on the other hand, clearly define a sequence of steps to be followed in a consistent manner, such as how the organization will respond to any policy violations. So with CDBG funded programs, established policies and procedures can help ensure compliance with HUD regulations and CDA requirements. All CDA requirements are taken directly from HUD regulations. So we take those HUD regulations and we look to enforce those, or we look to make sure that agencies are complying with those during the awarding process and at the point in which they've been awarded funding through CDA. It's important to have written procedures for more than just personnel issues. For example, a job training program may have an intake procedure to verify eligibility and gather client data, a separate procedure to track program data and outcomes, such as attendance, job placements, counseling sessions, so on and so forth. There also may be such things as a file retention policy. This information is especially important for new programs. We want to make sure that even if an organization is operating in a manner where there are practices that are part of the agency's culture that are known by individuals who work at the agency, we will operate and we will go off of what is strictly written down and what is used as policy by the respective agency. So that is what we ask for, and that is what we look for before, during, and after awarding of funding. So your policy and training can deter inappropriate behavior that would expose you to potential harm, such things as maybe a lawsuit or other things. If you do find yourself in that situation, a written policy can serve as evidence of your efforts to stop actions, a particular set of actions from occurring. This may limit your liability if you provide written proof of your policy and that you enforced it. So if funded, there are several policies that must be submitted before you can enter into a contract with CDA. Those policies are, and they're not limited to these four policies that we're mentioning, but these are the primary policies that we're looking for. We're looking for an agency to have a grievance policy, a conflict of interest policy, a non-discrimination policy, and an affirmative action policy. All policies must be written down. And again, as mentioned earlier, we look for what is written down on paper and what is written down and then carried out. Oftentimes there are certain settings or environments that have certain practices, but they may be informal. We are looking for the formal aspect of things and the formal components of your respective policies. Regarding the grievance policy, we define grievance as any complaint, problem, or concern of an employee regarding their workplace, job, or coworker relationship. So organizations must have a written grievance policy pertaining to their employees. In addition, CDA requires that organizations must have a written grievance policy that allows for the resolution of any complaints related to the CDBG program also. So we look for two types of grievance policies: the grievance policy associated with those employed, the grievance policy associated with those who receive service. Policies should include, but are not limited to, response procedures, the time frame in which the grievance can be issued or a complaint can be issued to the agency or by the employee, and the time frame in which it will be ideally resolved, and the staff person or individual responsible for handling the grievances. Your policies should address complaints of discrimination and complaints when an individual feels deprived of the benefits offered under the CDBG program. Lastly, the grievance policy should incorporate specific items and deadlines. There should be a specific time in which the grievance was issued. The specific grievance should be very easy to identify and understand, and there should be a time frame in which individuals have time to respond, or they have their options clearly identified within that policy. So for complaints of discrimination, underneath your grievance policy, when an applicant or a participant or registrant believes that he or she or any specific class of individuals has been or is being subject to discrimination, they may file a complaint of discrimination. There are several federally protected classes. Those include race, color, religion, sex, national origin, age, disability, familial status, or political affiliation. Please know that the City of St. Louis has additional protected classes. However, what we want to just highlight today is that these are areas that we have seen in the past from which complaints have come from. So we want to make sure that those who have grievance policies are aware of some of the things that we have seen and be mindful of those things with your current and or future policies. In the event that a CDBG funded agency receives a complaint of discrimination, they must forward all discrimination complaints to the CDA Executive Director within 2 working days of the initial complaint. This way, CDA can maintain the proper file and document the specifics of when we here at CDA received knowledge of the complaint from the agency or entity funded with CDBG funding. Regarding the program, when an applicant, participant, or registrant feels deprived of the benefits offered under the CDBG programs, the agency itself should make every reasonable effort to resolve any legitimate deficiencies identified by the complainant within 15 working days of the initial complaint. If the agency cannot satisfactorily resolve the complaint in this time frame, it must forward the complaint to the executive director within 2 working days of the exhaustion of remedies available to the agency in its grievance policy. So in the event of a grievance issue, there has to be a procedure put in place by the agency, steps that the agency can take to put forth efforts to resolve the complaint. And the same way that we ask for a timeline and a parameter in which an agency provides a framework to resolve those issues, we are asking the same of the agency itself. So these are some of the frameworks that an agency should be mindful of that we are asking for in the event that a complaint ever arises. Okay, conflict of interest. The purpose of a conflict of interest policy is to protect an organization's interest when it's contemplating entering into a transaction or arrangement that might benefit the private interest of one of its officers or directors, or might result in a possible excess benefit transaction. So no employee, officer, or agent of the grantee, subgrantee, or subrecipient must participate in the selection or in the award or administration of a contract supported by a federal award if he or she has a real or apparent conflict of interest. Such conflicts would arise when, for example, the employee or the officer or the agent, any member of his immediate family, his or her partner, or an organization which employs or is about to employ any of the above has a financial or other interest in a tangible personal benefit from a firm considered for a contract. One of our rule of thumbs has always been, if you even think or if you even have a small inkling that there may be a conflict of interest, document it and notify us. So the transparency and the being able of your agency to be forthcoming with that information up front is what we ask in the event that you ever think that there may be a conflict of interest or even a potential conflict of interest. There have been times where some situations that are potential conflicts of interest may ultimately be determined not to be conflicts of interest, or there's a separate procedure that can be taken if there is a perceived potential conflict of interest for further clarification. But you want to make sure that this is something that you identify initially and that it does not come back down the road to become a bigger issue later on. The conflict of interest regulation applies during the person's tenure and for 1 year thereafter. HUD, the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, may grant an exception to the conflict of interest on a case-by-case basis, provided that the agency must request an exception in writing to CDA before the conflict of interest occurs, and the opinion of CDA's attorney that the exception does not violate state or local law. And public disclosure of the conflict is required in a general circulation newspaper and to be paid for by the person with the conflict. So this is in the event that there is a conflict of interest or what seems to be a conflict of interest. Oftentimes, or not oftentimes, but there have been issues where there have been conflicts of interest that have been identified through particular types of associations or maybe some sort of relationship that has more of a direct relationship with CDA or a funder than others would normally have. So, in those instances, there have been situations in the past where there are some conflicts of interest that are reported to our office, and then we in turn are required to report that information to our funders, the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, to give the final say-so regarding whether or not the particular situation is a conflict. A few of those examples of a conflict of interest are as follows. The son of a board member was hired as the program coordinator for a CDBG funded after school program. Situations like this, those are immediate conflicts of interest because the son of the board member is perceived to have additional knowledge beyond what someone else may have regarding CDBG funding, and or there may give the impression that the process wasn't clear and transparent, and that there may have been some sort of competitive advantage for one person over someone else. There's a second example. A senior center has a board member who participates in CDBG funded exercise programs at the center. This is an interesting one. This is something that often comes in as a conflict of interest. So this is we want to make sure that the funding that we receive that is then allocated to entities within the community, that they're open to all individuals and they're open to anyone who wants access or wants to participate in the services. So there have been situations where requests for exemptions of a conflict of interest on situations like this happen. You want to make sure that just whomever is participating in the program has the same rights and privileges of anyone else who will be participating in that program. The third example, the executive director of a CDBG funded food pantry also owns an accounting company which has been awarded a contract to provide accounting services. Again, that's another example of a direct conflict of interest. You have someone who has very much influence over the entity that has been funded with CDBG funding, and they also have a financial benefit in a party that also has a relationship receiving CDBG funds. So the best thing in situations like that is to, get ahead of situations like this. Make sure that you identify these types of situations beforehand, because if they're not identified prior to and addressed properly, they ultimately could jeopardize funding that has been received or funding that you have benefited from. That's CDBG, that originated with, as CDBG funding. So your conflict of interest policy: organizations must maintain a written code or standards of conduct covering conflicts of interest. So board members, executive directors, staff paid with CDBG funds, staff involved with the management, administration, procurement will be required to sign a conflict of interest form. This often comes up every year if an agency has a large number of members on its board of directors. Does every member on the board of directors have to sign a CDBG conflict of interest form? The answer is yes. There's no way around that requirement. We have to make sure that all board members, executive directors, staff, so on and so forth, sign those conflict of interest forms and are aware of the potential conflict of interest forms. Oftentimes we hear things such as, well, our executive director, operates on behalf of the board of directors, and would the executive director acknowledging a conflict of interest form or, verbally providing that information to the board of directors or board members, would that be sufficient? For the requirements associated with CDBG funding, those requirements are not sufficient, and we would still need conflict of interest forms for every individual associated with activity that may have or has CDBG funds involved. It is a quite tedious process. I will be honest about that, but it's a requirement of the funding. It's one of the strings that comes attached to the CDBG funds. So the best way to get on top of that situation is just to identify who all you would think would need a conflict of interest form, and start working on your process to make sure that those forms are signed, updated, and ready for your agency to have on file and ready for the submission to CDA. CDBG funded staff will be required to sign both a conflict of interest and employee secondary employment questionnaire. So for agencies that are receiving CDBG funds, we just talked about the conflict of interest form, and in the event that there is secondary employment outside of that agency by a particular employee, there's a secondary employment questionnaire that they're required to fill out. Also, these requirements again come from our federal regulations in terms of who all benefits from receiving CDBG funds, and just making all that information clear and transparent. So the CDA non-discrimination policy: agencies awarded funding must comply with the intent of this policy, which is required to develop a written procedure which incorporates CDA's non-discriminatory policy. Your agency is still required to comply with all equal opportunity laws and or regulations contained in your contract with CDA. Affirmative action being a policy in which an individual's color, race, sex, religion, or national origin are taken into an account to increase opportunities provided to an underrepresented part of society should also be a part of your policies and procedures. You want to make sure that you have a written plan to guide the organization's actions according to the President's Executive Order 11246 as amended. It shall include, but not to be limited to, a statement of policy on employment, promotion, demotion, transfer, recruitment, and recruitment advertising, layoffs, and selection for training. Ideally, this can be included in your organization's personnel policies. So that concludes the policies and procedures. I'm going to turn the presentation back over. We have some new information regarding construction requirements. And we have with us, I believe Lisa Silliman is with us, who is our resident architect, who has some updates regarding construction requirements that will be helpful for agencies looking for CDBG funding. So I'm going to stop sharing at this time.
Hi there, we're getting set up. As Justin said, my name is Lisa Seligman and I'm the architectural manager for CDA. I review all of the housing projects that come through CDA and also help to advise projects that involve construction in other capacities, as well as managing our environmental review group. Construction. What is construction? Well, we all kind of know what construction is, but when we start talking about construction projects, really what we're talking about are public improvements for facilities projects. And these are specifically non-housing facilities that are publicly owned facilities, like, for example, rec centers, or infrastructure like parks and streets and playgrounds and underground utilities, or buildings owned by nonprofits that are open to the general public. Sometimes as you're working on your application for your project, one of the critical issues that we deal with is site control. A lot of times a applicant will own the property already, which is fine. Sometimes people are purchasing property from LRA or leasing property. However, you have control over the property, we need to see that you have that at the time of application. So your application should include a copy of the deed, a copy of your lease, including any lease allowances. If you're looking at getting an LRA property, the LRA option should be included. If you're an applicant for a public facility, you should have a description of your interactions with BPS or whoever the holding facility for your property is. So a rec center would be the parks, etc. That has to be in your application because we don't want to do an application for property that you can't control. Now then, that control needs to be documented in the name of the entity that is applying. So if the property is held by you as an individual and your organization is applying, that's not going to work. So make sure that the names align. And make sure that you can include any correspondence that you've had with LRA or BPS or whatever holding entity has any publicly owned property. Another thing that needs to be in your application for a construction project is a project schedule. This is a timetable that outlines the start and end dates and milestones that must be met for the project to be completed on time. Keep in mind that projects that we fund for construction usually have about 6 months of preliminary work before you can put a shovel in the ground. Or if you don't own the property already, you've got about 6 months before you can even close on the property. So make sure that your option agreements or your lease agreements reflect that reality. You cannot begin construction or take any concrete moves towards site acquisition until we complete the environmental review and the procurement processes that have to be done. This is a critical thing. So any project that would need to start before June 2022, really, this is not your funding source. You will automatically be disqualified for funding or construction. Other requirements for your application for a construction project. Important things. We would like to see design drawings. This is a preferred thing. It helps us to understand exactly what it is that we are funding and how it relates to the neighborhood that it's in. A very common issue with drawings is that when you are doing a project that is funded with federal money, the Section 106 of the Historic Preservation Act applies, even if it's not a National Register listed building or in a designated city or National Historic District. So this means that an existing building, you probably need to be very mindful of maintaining its historic appearance on the exterior and in public areas of the interior to the extent that those qualities are existing. We also need photos of the existing building and the area of the construction. These will be required for the Section 106 and environmental review if the project is funded. There's a specific set of photos that we will require, and it's nice to have them in this package. So outdoor photos include all 4 sides of the building and photos of adjacent sites and buildings around the building. And then on the interior, we'd like to see photographs of the public spaces of the building and any woodwork or significant architectural features that are existing in the building. We also need to see your experience as an agency and of your key project personnel in dealing with a construction project like this. So this can just be a list that gives project name, the scope of work of the project. Was it just an interior renovation? Was it a new building out of the ground? What the date was, what the address is, who the architect and general contractor were, the construction cost, and the square footage. This helps us to gauge how capable you will be of conducting the project that you're proposing. Obviously, we don't expect, if you're just renovating a small commercial building as the home for your organization, we don't expect you to have built a $70 million new construction building. We would like to see that the key project personnel have experience doing something similar in scope. Another critical piece of it is a professionally prepared construction budget. This is not a bid. Don't take your project out to bid because we have very specific procurement requirements that you have to follow. However, you can hire a professional construction estimator or pay a person who works for a general contractor to prepare a professional construction estimate so that you have a good, solid construction number. Don't go out to bid until you've been awarded, please. Okay. Let's see here. So construction requirements. I mentioned environmental review earlier. We conduct an environmental review in-house. This is mainly a review of the literature and the public databases involving all different aspects of environmental review for the site. Everything from, are there endangered species known to live on the site? Bats are the most common one around here, if you didn't know that. And looking at what known contamination might be around the site. The most common one around here are dry cleaners. And trying to make sure that we don't fund a project that is on a contaminated site or a site that is a home to an endangered species or endangers a wetland or whatever. And also that the project itself will have a positive impact on the environment around it from a material and social point of view. We have to complete this before you can complete acquisition of the property that you plan to improve with CDBG funds, or before you can even think about starting construction. So it takes a little bit of time to do. So a very critical thing there is that we don't do much testing most of the time. If you, as part of your due diligence for the project, need to do testing, please share that information with us because it will help us to better evaluate your project and to do it more quickly. And now I'm going to hand it off to Tayo so that she can tell you all about bidding and procurement.
Thank you, Lisa. And so I'll be talking about procurement. So soliciting contractors or general contractors must occur after the completion of CDA's environmental review process. Not receiving preliminary approval of the RFP from CDA prior to publication will result in either the reissuance of the RFP or the rescinding of the CDBG funding. Thus, it is crucial that you keep close communications with CDA during this procurement process and also the entire construction process. In the RFP, CDA will check for such things as required CDBG contract provisions and, when applicable, Section 3, Davis-Bacon and MBE-WBE clauses. I will discuss these regulations in upcoming slides. The RFP must be formally advertised for 30 days in a general circulation paper such as the St. Louis Post-Dispatch or the St. Louis Business Journal, minority papers such as the St. Louis American, and with Crossroads Plan Room, which is a platform allowing for MBE-WBEs to review and bid on construction projects. Ceiling bids must be used to ensure fair and open competition to prevent the soliciting agency from sharing competitive bid information during the evaluation process. The agency must select the lowest responsive bidder, which equates to the least expensive bidder that sufficiently addresses the scope of work. So this slide covers key features of our procurement policy. However, it is not all inclusive. So I again emphasize it is critical that your agency keeps your CDA program monitor in the loop through the entire process so that we can avoid any sort of recension or repayment of CDBG funding. MBE-WBE refers to minority business enterprises and women-owned business enterprises. Monitoring of MBE-WBE hiring practices is responsibility of St. Louis Development Corporation, or SLDC. SLDC is a quasi-government branch of the city of St. Louis. If funded, Stacy Fowler of SLDC will discuss more in depth with agencies how to comply with MBE-WBE regulations. In general, the construction project goals for enterprises must be met by utilizing at least 21% African American, 2% Hispanic American, 0.5 Asian American, 0.5 Native American, and 11% women-owned construction subcontractors. While the construction workforce goals must be met by ensuring that a certain percentage of labor hours are completed by certain types of workers. More specifically, at least 25% of the workforce must be minority workers, 7% women, 20% from an approved or recognized apprenticeship program, and 23% must be City of St. Louis residents. As of June 1st, 2021, Section 3 requirements have changed. Now, any public improvement or facility awarded with more than $2,000 in HUD funding must comply with Section 3. The purpose of Section 3 is to ensure that the employment and other economic opportunities generated by HUD programs shall, to the greatest extent feasible, be directed toward low to moderate income persons. Note that income limits of what is characterized as being low to moderate income is relatively high. For example, the income limit for a family size of 1 is currently $47,550. HUD coined the terms Section 3 workers and targeted Section 3 workers. The only difference between a targeted Section 3 worker from the Section 3 worker is that the former lives near the construction site. Both types of workers are, for the most part, deemed low to moderate income either by their wages, their residency in public housing, participation in a Section 8 voucher program, or participation in Youth Build, a construction apprentice program for adolescents ages 16 through 24. Section 3 certification can be also based upon if a business qualifies as what is called a Section 3 business concern. If the majority of a business is owned and controlled by Section 3 workers, then all of its workers, whether or not they are low to moderate income, are deemed Section 3 workers. Furthermore, if at least 75% of the labor hours worked within the past 3 months have been conducted by Section 3 workers, then that business can be deemed a Section 3 business concern, and all workers employed by that business are automatically Section 3 workers. As such, it behooves agencies to seek out a general contractor and subcontractors that can be certified as Section 3 business concerns to reach Section 3 goals. The Section 3 goals are as follows. 25% or more of the total construction hours worked on site are to be from Section 3 workers, while 5% or more of those hours must be completed by targeted Section 3 workers. CDA has monitors who specialize in Section 3. They will discuss more in depth with CDBG funded agencies the requirements of Section 3 and how to meet them. Any public improvement or facility awarded with $2,000 or more in federal funding must comply with Davis-Bacon. The purpose of Davis-Bacon is to ensure that all construction workers are paid a prevailing wage. CDA verifies wages by reviewing certified payrolls, or CPRs. CPRs are forms utilized by all laborers receiving federal funds that record hours worked, the wages paid to each employee, and the jobs those employees perform. Cross-referencing the CPRs, CDA will also interview workers to confirm their wages. CPRs are crucial in tracking the labor hours for both Davis-Bacon and Section 3 compliance and must be submitted to CDA on a weekly basis. Contractors will not get paid until their CPRs are received by CDA and are entered in correctly. Note that prior to an RFP, a memorandum of agreement or MOA may be needed to determine who will take the lead on monitoring Davis-Bacon requirements. If an agency is utilizing multiple federal funds, an MOA would indicate that whatever funder has the most skin in the game would be responsible for monitoring Davis-Bacon, while the other funders would cross-check their work. If the agency's site is owned by BPS, then CDA would enter into an MOA so that BPS would be the lead monitor for Davis-Bacon compliance. Like with Section 3, CDA has monitors that specialize in Davis-Bacon who will be able to assist you should you get funded. So this concludes the organizational requirements presentation. Let's see if there are any questions. It does not appear that we have any questions at this time. Is there anything else, Justin, that you would like to state?
Not at this time. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in today. The presentation slides will be made available on the CDA website after today's presentation. And I want to remind everybody that tomorrow, our capacity building training, CDBG financial management workshop will begin at 1 p.m. So again, thank you all for attending today. And we look for you to join us tomorrow.